Welcome, slow-wandering friend. Come in, exhale, and settle beneath the wide, imaginary canopy of star-flecked Sahel sky that drifts above our quiet corner of the internet. You have opened the hush-lit doorway to ancient wonders, a channel devoted to architecture, memory, and the very human wish to lean stones, or in tonight's case, sun-baked mud, against the swift passage of time. Before we fold ourselves into the first gentle chapter of our 2-hour exploration, allow me to invite you to whisper, or type, the place from which you are listening. Perhaps you are tuning in from a rain-washed city, or a candle-bright study, or a sleeper train gliding past midnight lakes. Wherever you find yourself, consider this a circular gathering place, as old as story, as soft as nightfall, where distance folds and silence carries voice. Take another patient breath. Feel shoulders sink. The lights around you may dim. The world outside the window may still be busy. Here, however, we slip into a more unhurried current, the pulse of mud bricks setting beneath a pastel dawn, the gentle rasp of wooden trowels, and the low, melodic chanting of masons who have answered the same annual summons for centuries. Our feature this evening, and for the full tapestry of 10 gradually deepening chapters, is the great Mosque of Djenné, the largest earthen structure on Earth. It rises, or perhaps quietly germinates, from the floodplain of the Niger River in present-day Mali, a tawny monumental heap of wet clay turned to living architecture. Not made once, but made again and again, each spring, each rainy season, each generation shaping, repairing, caressing it back from the brink of erosion. And so, to begin, let us drift, as though we were a small, curious drone, skimming inches above the river at first light. There is no engine hum in this dream flight, only the hush of early water, the sweep of air lifted by dawn's first wisp of heat. The Bani moves sluggishly, opalescent, shouldering small rafts of water hyacinth, reflecting a gold-pink stripe where the sun is trying out its colors. Ahead, a scatter of low mud brick houses leans toward the stream, their walls washed with the faint scent of dust after night dew. We rise. In the distance, the great mosque coalesces, not as an abrupt skyline, but as a patient, terraced silhouette, its 3 central towers cresting like slow waves that have turned to solid earth. From above, the building appears almost soft. Rounded buttresses sprout wooden palm trunk beams called toron, like rows of gentle spines inviting hands, shoulders, and the footing of nimble climbers during the annual replastering. A hush of voices drifts upward, women humming old Bambara melodies while stirring vats of river silt, straw, and rice husk. Men laughing in subdued camaraderie as they heft basket after basket of fresh banco, that unmistakably warm bread dough mixture of clay and water. The trowels tap lazily, a percussion softened by distance, tock, 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 followed by the susurrus of mud spread across the wall's swelling surface. Imperfect, rhythmic, timeless. We hover, still. A call to prayer winds around us, thin, melismatic, then mingles with the deeper chant of work. 2 currents of devotion, one to faith, the other to the building that shelters that faith. Why should this matter, you ask, in a world where glass curtain walls rise 100 stories, where satellites braid the sky, where digital archives claim eternity? Because here, mundane soil still answers the oldest architectural question: how to take what lies underfoot and turn it into a house for the invisible. The Great Mosque is more than heritage. It is living proof that community can be both the builder and the mortar, that ritual upkeep can hold as much engineering wisdom as any algorithm. Yet the stakes are tender and real. Each year, harsher Sahelian summers fry the outer surfaces. Each year, rains grow less predictable, sometimes absent, so bricks crack, sometimes torrential, so walls slump. Climate charts speak in abstract curves. Djenné's masons read them with their palms pressed against damp adobe. The structure survives on a delicate bargain with weather, a bargain renewed by thousands of hands. Beneath the gentle storyline of trowels and chants, deeper mysteries murmur. Lost within the labyrinth of side chambers and beneath nearby mud vaults lie manuscripts, tens of thousands, handwritten in Maghrebi script, some describing astronomy, some medicine, some luminous Sufi poetry. A rumor persists of scrolls so fragile they crumble to a sigh if exposed to direct harmattan breeze. Then there are the ostrich eggs, alabaster pale perched atop the mosque's pinnacles. Some claim they symbolize fertility, others that they ward off lightning, others still that they are simply whimsical adornments inherited from earlier Sudano Sahelian designs. No one truly agrees, and perhaps that suspended uncertainty is part of their charm. In our travels tonight and across the subsequent chapters, we will unspool those riddles gently. We will sift sediment both geological and cultural, listen to oral histories, retrace European sketchbooks, and read Arabic chronicles. We will eavesdrop on colonial administrators fretting over structural cracks, and later on, UNESCO engineers calculating load distribution. We will accompany climate scientists who plant modest moisture sensors at the mosque's base, worried that the very ground might shift irrevocably. But all of that will unfold in unhurried cadence, like dusk following day. For now, remain aboard our drifting vantage, suspended above the floodplain. Notice how the town organizes itself in painterly clusters. Low parapets, flat roofs strewn with drying millet, courtyards where goats nose through straw. Notice, too, the braided causeways, elevated just enough so that, when the river swells during rainy season, pilgrims and market traders stepping from boat to plaza remain ankle-deep, not waist-deep. Djenné is a choreography with water, a knowledge encoded since the time when trans-Saharan caravans traced invisible lines across the dunes to reach these markets of salt, gold, and ideas. Though we speak of mud, imagine polished engineering hidden inside each adobe course. The buttresses thicken at their base like the trunks of ancient baobabs, distributing load laterally, resisting shear. Toran beams are not merely footholds but stress detectors. When they sag, masons read it as a physician reads a patient's pulse. Walls are tapered upward, optimizing compressive strength. Voids are placed to invite cross-ventilation in scorching April heat. Each lesson is centuries old, unpatented, communal. As your breathing steadies, consider the delicate paradox. Architecture hardened from elements, yet entirely dependent on those same elements. Pause long enough and you will feel the Bani River still conversing with the mosque through capillary suction in the soil beneath. Pause even longer and you might sense, like a buried heartbeat, the earlier versions of the structure, 4, perhaps 6, faded, collapsed, cannibalized into the next. Djenné's mosque is less a singular building than an unbroken tradition of rebuilding. Tonight's chapter is our threshold, our vestibule. Over the next 9 installments, we will glide through time. First, tomorrow, into the raw riverside pits where clay is mixed with chopped straw, then onward to the 13th century court of Khoi Komboro, visionary ruler who ordered the first monumental mosque, to the 19th century French military fort whose cannons faced these very walls, and to the bustling Monday market where indigo-dyed fabrics and desert incense still exchange hands beneath the mosque's gaze. We will meet the baryton, the guild tasked with orchestrating each year's replastering, and we will follow a single mason's journey from adolescent apprentice to gray-bearded master, his fingerprint pressed forever into the facade. We will open virtual drawers of brittle manuscripts, unlace goatskin bindings, translate verses that map the rising of Orion to the sowing of sorghum. We will learn how ostrich eggs once traveled by camel from distant savannas, their hollow shells cleaned, sealed, and lifted high as invitations to birds of protective omen. Alongside the romance, we will face science. Climate modelers will guide us through rainfall projections. Conservators will discuss chemical stabilizers that might one day mingle with traditional bow. We will weigh gently the ethical tensions of intervention, how much to preserve, how much to let erode gracefully, like an elder returning to dust. Threading through every scene will be people. Schoolchildren tracing Toran shadows at sunset, women threading beads for grandmothers who can recite lineages stretching back before the Mali Empire, imams balancing liturgical tradition with the practicalities of mobile phones and electric loudspeakers. Architecture, after all, is only the husk. The kernel is human life. For this opening quarter hour, however, we remain mostly silent observers, letting the drone of our imagination drift lower, closer, until we are level with the plaza's packed earth. The first rays of sun now graze the mosque, turning its wet plaster to burnished copper. Steam rises from the surface where cool dawn air meets drying mud. A heron flaps across the river and lands atop the forecourt balustrade, feathers puffed, patient. Somewhere a baby cries, somewhere a muezzin clears his throat. Let us close our eyes a moment. Feel the grain of banco against fingertips phantom pressed into palm. Smell the faint mineral sweetness of wetted dust. Listen, talk, 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 the trowel's lullaby, and beneath it, the melodic invocation, Bismillah. Bismillah, repeated, not chanted for audience, but murmured for alignment of heart and hand. When you next open your eyes, perhaps halfway between waking and dream, you may discover that our drone viewpoint has dissolved and you are standing barefoot on the floodplain itself. Clay squishes cool underfoot, a palm shadow traces slowly across the ground. That sensation, friend, is where we will begin Chapter 2. Tomorrow, in that new chapter, we shall kneel beside the riverbank, scoop raw earth, and learn exactly how silt, straw, and a recipe older than the oldest dynasty fuse into bricks of remarkable resilience. For now, rest in this aerial hush, the floodplain breathing, the mosque glowing softly, as though lit from within. Thank you for joining Ancient Wonders this gentle evening, and remember, feel free to share the latitude and longitude of your listening nest in the comments below. Until our next slow step together, may your thoughts settle like calm water, and may the quiet architecture of night support your dreams. Moonlight still silvered the crenellated silhouette evoked in the previous vigil, yet the story now loosens its threads and drifts farther back, farther, until the minarets themselves dissolve into unworked silt, and time settles upon a quieter settlement. Djenné Mali, the ancient kernel beside the gentle bend of the Bani River. In this hush, there is no fired brick, no courtyard for Friday prayer, only low earthen ridges, reed partitions, and the soft susurrus of water eddying around the roots of flooded grasses. The last image of the mosque becomes an unborn seed, and the narration slips into the soil with it, gently. 3 centuries before the Common Era, morning begins not with a call to prayer, but with the crackle of distant hearths and the chirr of red-throated lapwings stalking the wet margins. Families rise within domed huts woven of sorghum stalk. Smoke curls through narrow vents, blurring the boundary between roof and sky. Along packed earth lanes, children chase each other's footprints, while elders sort rice husks from new harvests, the chaff drifting like pale moths across sunbeams. Every movement feels unhurried, suspended inside the river's tolerant breathing. Even the dogs bark softly, as though mindful of the saturated silence around. Riverine ecology dictates the rhythm of settlement as firmly as any future imam's sermon. In the lean months, when floodwater withdraws and black humus cracks in the glare, people shift their hearths to higher knolls, stacking earth rings to resist accelerated erosion. During inundation, the village becomes an archipelago. Canoe paths double as market streets. This amphibious habit does not discourage growth, it choreographs it. Over centuries, households nest within concentric ridges of spoil, creating a cellular urban plan resembling fish scales pressed into mud. Orientation is never cardinal but hydrological. Walls lean toward water, gates frame evolving channels with care. Evidence of these choices sleeps beneath later layers, revealed only when archaeologists lift a clod and discover a gaze from unfired clay. Terracotta figurines, some scarcely taller than a thumb, others solid enough to anchor a net, depict riders, drummers, mothers balancing gourds, spirits with crocodile jaws. Their surfaces retain fingerprints, ridges where a maker pinched nostrils or pressed millet awns for texture. Buried among hearth ash or placed beside collapsed walls, they are mute footnotes to daily gestures. Yet they hint at an aesthetic grammar. Rounded limbs, elongated torsos, heads tilted skyward as though following invisible constellations through silted dusk above. In middens near the settlement's northern shoulder, strings of glass beads glimmer like condensed dawn. Blues from Egypt, ambers from distant Saharan workshops, striped millefiori beads that once crossed the Niger on tufted camels. Each fragment charts a migratory tale beyond local horizons. To touch them is to feel the river elongate into caravan routes, and caravan routes curl into maritime crossings. Trade is not a singular event, but a gentle osmosis. Ideas seep with the beads, carrying copper blades, cowrie shells, perhaps the first whispered syllables about prophets walking far to the east, not yet urgent, merely curious and soft. Near hearth circles, archaeologists sift universal residue, rice husks carbonized by chance, still fragrant when moistened in the lab. These delicate spirals confirm what oral histories always repeated, that African rice, Oryza glaberrima, flourished long before imported Asian strains arrived. Husks slip like fine parchment through sieves, yet they carry weight. They prove sustained agriculture, surplus, storage, and therefore time enough for artisans to sculpt a horse or potters to temper clay with chaff. In every burnt fragment lives the sound of paddies swaying under Sahelian thermals, stalks bending to mirror levees shaped by human hands in seasonal rhythms of water. Unlike stone-hewn cities that bristle across other continents, Djenné Mali grows from what it stands upon. Laterite-rich alluvium hammered with wooden pestles, layered with straw left to dry under intolerant sun, then remoistened for sculpting. Walls bulge gently, respecting the slump angle of mud. Courses run horizontal only in concept, for each season redefines line and plumb. Houses are living vessels. They breathe, crack, receive repairs, develop calluses of fresh plaster. Architecture here is maintenance disguised as ritual. Even the gloss of surface pigment, ochre, white kaolin, charcoal black, exists to be renewed after a monsoon's tantrum has puckered the facade once again gently. From a slow aerial drift, the settlement seems organic, yet closer scrutiny exposes method. Hearths cluster in threes, forming triadic nodes around shared pounding stones. Grain silos occupy safer terraces, ringed by berms that double as footpaths. Domestic courtyards are seldom square. They taper toward drainage ditches where night soil becomes fertilizer. These arrangements are not decreed by chiefs or scribes, but negotiated annually with the flood cycle. Urbanism becomes ecology set to human scale, a choreography of retreat and return. The grid breathes. In flood it dilates, in drought it contracts, always remembering previous shapes the way muscles remember dance. Yet waters alone cannot explain the slow transfiguration awaiting this plain. Trade intensifies, drawing smiths from the Dogon cliffs and Tuareg merchants with salt slabs sparkling like captured moonbeams. Migrants arrive in braided waves, some seeking arable niches, others respite from regional wars. Each new group brings dialects, weaving patterns, culinary infusions, and inevitably, stories of faith. First come half-remembered parables of a distant Hijaz, recited beside campfires as moral curiosities. Later, wandering scholars carry worn pages of Arabic script, offering blessings in return for lodging. With them travel novel weights and measures, tax concepts, and the promise of trans-Saharan legitimacy soon. Conversion here is never abrupt. It swells like floodwater, seeping through fissures rather than falling as storm. Household shrines absorb Quranic inscriptions alongside older figurines. Prayer beads clink beside cowrie bracelets. New names accompany old praise songs. At first, Islam signifies connection to remote ports, access to literate contracts, protection under larger banners. Slowly, faith permeates architecture. Walls incorporate mihrab niches, compounds reposition entrances to align with sunrise over Mecca. The process endures generations, shaping grandchildren who take prostration for granted and puzzle over the terracotta ancestors sleeping beneath threshold stones, their crocodile mouths sealed but not forgotten at all. Across these centuries, the mound of Djenné Mali grows like a breathing dune. Every floor swept brings new sediment. Every fallen roof becomes next season's foundation. Layers accumulate, each stratum containing charcoal, quartz sherd, seed, whisper, sigh. If the site were sliced like baobab wood, it would reveal rings of wet years, drought years, plague years, festival years, indistinguishable to inattentive eyes, yet vibrant under attentive fingertips. The city is both palimpsest and compost heap, ensuring that memory is never static, but perpetually fermenting, smelling faintly of smoke, tamarind clay, and the faint iron tang of flooded laterite at dawn again. Imagine night deepening over the mound. Crickets rehearse their steady refrain. Frogs answer from temporary pools. Within the buried strata, beads rub gently against one another, stirred by the minute heave of cooling earth. Figurines remain unblinking, but in darkness their silence feels articulate, speaking of drumbeats long since dissolved. Charred rice husks release a memory of harvest smoke each time a termite tunnel brushes them. The entire settlement dreams in slow firefly pulses, a vault of unspoken sentences awaiting daylight trowels. Yet even daylight will be gentle, respectful, for mud remembers bruises and never fully forgives sunset or rain. In ages still distant, architects will stand upon this very mound, feeling its firmness beneath sandals, and they will decide to plant the grand walls of a mosque. They will not realize they are anchoring buttresses into centuries of figurines and husks, They will simply sense a rightness, a solidity, as though God himself had packed the earth. Their masons will raise timbers called toran, smear clay laced with rice chaff, and drive palm beams like vertebrae through the skin. The prayer hall will inhale the memories below, exhaling them as faint coolness during midday devotion for future kneeling bodies. For now, Djenné Mali rests beneath soft starlight, its outlines barely discernible from river mist. Each pulse of water under moonlit current traces arteries that will feed a larger city, a larger dream. When dawn arrives, merchants will load canoes, smiths will coax forges awake, children will watch algae swirl around their ankles, and somewhere a traveler will ask where to find a place of communal worship. The answer will still be forming, like clay waiting for the first kneading. In the next quiet passage, foundations will begin to gather, mud will arrange itself into purpose, and silence will lift gently upward. In imagination, the camera drifts downward, past silt, past pearl dust from broken shells, until it pauses beside a single seed of African rice. The seed is desiccated, charcoaled yet intact, its hull flecked with microscopic gold from river suspension. Around it lie shards of furnace slag, a camel bell tongueless and green with patina, and the minuscule bone of a tilapia fry. These fragments do not speak in sentences. They hum in chords, sustaining a note that bridges past and future. Listen long enough, and the hum aligns with heartbeats, preparing the listener for the making of walls to come. Softly, we drift forward from the last image of the sun slipping behind the clay brick silhouette, its reflection still trembling on the languid surface of the Bani River. The evening hush settles like fine dust upon the walls, and for a moment, the world seems balanced between departure and arrival. In that hesitant twilight, Djenné's ground pulses with remembered footsteps, waiting for the next tale to unfurl. Let us follow the fading ripples, deeper into the 13th century, when a caravan of human possibility approached. Scholars speaking in measured Arabic, artisans carrying tools of copper and palm, each one guided by the golden promise of Mansa Musa. They came not in thunderous conquest, but in slow, thoughtful files, their camels stepping like metronomes over the Sahel's brittle crust. At the head rode the sovereign's couriers, bearing letters inked on soft gazelle parchment. Behind them shuffled singers, geometers, jurists, masons, and woodcarvers, their voices lowered to keep the desert's secret stillness intact. Local herdsmen remember the sound as a moving whisper, greetings in Soninke, responses in Mande, recitations from the Quran reverberating beneath woven canopies. With each advance, the village's single adobe prayer hall seemed to inhale, preparing to enlarge itself into a grand house worthy of so many dialects of devotion. In later centuries, travelers would ask, how do we know this moment truly happened? The written chronicles, those neat Arabic lines drafted in Timbuktu or Fes, record the year 1240 of the Christian calendar as the inauguration of Djenné's first Friday mosque. Yet the griots of the floodplain say otherwise. They sing of a night when a meteor brushed the moon, compelling the elders to build before dawn. In their verses, the scholars are nameless, and the artisans arrive barefoot, guided by drums, not decrees. Between papyrus and praise song lies a shimmering gap, and it is inside that gap our sleepy meditation finds its tempo. The parchment smell of indigo and animal glue, the griot's voice smells of smoke and millet. One can be folded and stored, the other floats, reforming itself with every recital. Comparing them is like watching two rivers touch, one clear with melted snow, the other dark with loam, each preserving a different sky. For our purposes, we let them flow alongside. The chronicles supply dates, dimensions, the mention of a chief mason named Sidi Yahya. The oral cycle offers colors, walls as brown as baobab bark, pillars that grew like termite mounds, and a silence inside the hypostyle hall so cool it could quench thirst. Picture that hall now. 70 slender mud pillars, hand-compacted, not thrown from any architect's compass, but arranged by the conversation of bodies, how far shoulders need to move while bowing, how shadows fall at noon prayer, how air must twist to stay alive in the Sahelian heat. The hypostyle plan, borrowed distantly from Kairouan and Kufa, arrives in Djenné softened by river silt, roof beams of palm, a forest of rafters where swallows knit nests, a ceiling low enough to cradle echo, yet high enough to invite the morning's angled gold. No minarets yet, only 3 modest buttresses hinting at vertical dreams. Growth was never abrupt. Like a calabash left near a spring, the mosque swelled by absorbing what surrounded it. A widow donated her courtyard, a caravan leader pledged spare planks, an itinerant mathematician calculated the Qibla with a bone quadrant and adjusted the eastern wall by half a cubit. Over years, earthen little annexes sprouted, an ablution niche, a room for manuscripts, a shaded portico where elderly jurists could comment on Maliki law without squinting. From above, the plan appeared less like a rectilinear diagram than a root system searching for water, each tendril thickening whenever new knowledge arrived. By the time Mansa Musa himself set out on his glorious pilgrimage to Cairo and Mecca, the Djenné Mosque had already become a way station for ideas. Caravans brought not only salt and cloth, but riddles: how to square the circle, how to predict eclipses, how to price a slave without selling a soul. Under the dim oil lamps, Berber astronomers argued with Songhai theologians. A Tuareg elder traced constellations in millet dust, while a Wolof poet annotated love lyrics in the margins of a hadith commentary. Outside, the smell of camel sweat mingled with smoke from shea nut braziers, wrapping the night in a fragrant shawl of trade. The walls listened, seasoned by each syllable. Earthen architecture is porous. Clay absorbs not only moisture, but murmurs. The next afternoon, when the midday heat silenced even the cicadas, a listener could press an ear against the prayer niche and, it is said, hear faint recitations from the evening before, stored like breath inside the adobe pores. Whether myth or anatomical truth of mud, the notion pleased visitors. They imagined the mosque as a living library, its bricks indexing verses the way palm leaf pages do, each annual replastering adding yet another gloss to the encyclopedic skin. Indeed, nothing about the structure remained fixed. Once the Niger's floods receded, townspeople convened for the great crepissage, a communal plastering day when riverbank clay was kneaded with rice husks and hoisted up ladders to smooth every crack. Children sang timing chants, elders checked alignment with the falling sun. The scholars, robes hitched above muddy ankles, debated eschatology while sculpting the facade's supple ribs. Repetition became devotion, repair as prayer, maintenance as memory. In the same rhythm, arguments in the study halls were revisited, polished, widened, never sealed. The mosque taught that knowledge, like adobe, survives by being continuously reworked. But empires breathe as bricks do, drawing vigor, then exhaling it. After Musa's golden age, the Mali polity loosened into tributary fragments. Tributary chiefs quarreled, tax routes forked, and caravans, wary of tariffs and skirmishes, skirted Djenné for alternate ports upriver. Inside the mosque, the buzz of debate thinned to a contemplative hush. A blind imam still led prayers, but the manuscript room gathered more dust than questions. Political fragmentation, subtle at first, pressed like drought upon the intellectual water table, lowering both the influx of scholars and the budget for repairs. Nature, indifferent to dynastic fortunes, compounded the strain. One particularly stubborn flood arrived early, lingering long enough to undermine the southern wall. Clay loves moisture in moderation. Prolonged saturation turns it to melancholy paste. Pillars began to slump as if dozing. Archival manuscripts mentioned congregants wading ankle-deep to reach the mihrab, the floor mirroring lantern light like a quiet lagoon. When waters finally withdrew, they left behind a lacework of cracks, each one a miniature delta through which next year's rain could wander. Then came the termites, royal engineers in their own right. Drawn by the promise of damp palm beams, they tunneled with patient certainty, hollowing rafters from within. At first the damage was invisible, the roof still held its shape, pretending solidity. But during a hot harmattan afternoon, a single beam snapped like a dried reed, scattering prayer mats with ochre dust. Villagers would later recall the heartbreaking sound it made, less a crash than a sigh, as though the mosque itself were admitting exhaustion. Repair crews patched, propped, and prayed, yet the combined assaults of politics, water, and insects kept returning. Slowly, sections were abandoned. The scholar's loft became a storeroom for salt cakes. The shaded portico collapsed into a sleepy heap visited only by goats. Even in decline, however, the structure mentored its people. It illustrated impermanence, reminding clerics and merchants alike that ideas like walls must circulate or crumble. Some blamed decline on human negligence, others on cosmic rotation, still others on the errant meteor remembered by the griots, claiming the stone's long-dormant spell finally reached its terminus. Either way, by the dawn of the 17th century, the first grand mosque had become a rippling outline against morning fog, half-standing, half-storied. Travelers from Morocco noted only ruins. Local singers countered with verses about a hidden mosque submerged beneath the mud, waiting to rise again when the moon and Bani River agree. Such contradictions are not to be solved but inhaled, gently, like the cool air inside a cracked pillar. For in Djenné, material and memory weave an architecture that neither collapse nor reconstruction can fully erase. Night settles once more, and the river resumes its slow arithmetic along the banks. Above the quiet roofline, stars flicker like glints on forgotten gold, silently guiding new caravans toward horizons we are yet to explore. In the velvety dark, we leave the first mosque resting in layers of clay and dream, its story unfinished, its lessons soft as silt. When dawn returns, our gaze will shift to the hands that dared to imagine a second incarnation. Builders who listened to the ruins, learned their grammar, and composed a structure both echo and reply. But for now, let the silence seal the lamp. The last smear of sunset, described in the previous passage as a thin flame licking the adobe ridgeline, fades now into a bruised violet. In that half-light, the great Mosque of Djenné relaxes, the baked mud cooling, the surfaces exhaling the day's stored heat. The rhythm of a centuries-old dynasty lies within those timbers and walls. Yet tonight the story leans outward, toward distant capitals and wandering cartographers, toward the long twilight of the Songhai and the restless Moroccan gaze. Once, Djenné stood under the immense umbrella of the Songhai Empire, a lattice of trade, scholarship, and slow-moving caravans. Gold dust sifted through fingers at market stalls, manuscripts breathed under reed roofs, calligraphers sharpened quills. By the late 16th century, however, the imperial shadow quivered. Saadi warriors from the far north advanced along the Niger, carrying the echo of Marrakesh's minarets in their ambitions. A line of glimmering Moroccan cannonballs opened hairline fractures in Songhai confidence, and in those fractures desert winds planted seeds of unease. Yet the mosque endured, its mud, its faith, its engineering, a quiet rebuke to every drumbeat of conquest. As the 17th and 18th centuries unfolded, Djenné's mastery of earth construction persisted. The annual festival of the crepissage, part engineering feat, part civic liturgy, renewed the walls again and again. Children queued with calabashes of river water. Seasoned masons listened for the dull thud that told them a brick had bonded. Elders uttered prayers that neither empire nor flood would disturb these harmonious geometries. The building seemed eternal. Twilight, of course, is deceptive. The Songhai polity had disintegrated. Control flickered between local fiefdoms, Fulani imams, and merchant heiresses. Still the market sang, and the Niger continued its patient conversation with the Delta. Then, early in the 19th century, a fresh set of eyes floated southward on pirogues and horseback, eyes rimmed by polished brass telescopes and the lacquered journals of the French Académie. Enter René Caillé, Caillé's protégés, and nameless orderlies whose travel trunks clinked with mercury thermometers. Their task sounded simple on parchment: verify the rumored Golden City, map the course of the Niger, measure the standing wonders. Yet rivers speak in riddles, and Djenné met them with a quiet defiance. On the 17th of March 1830, Caillé's companion recorded, "The mosque resembles a monstrous anthill, the color of burned umber, crowned by spikes of timber like the quills of a porcupine." An artist in the party sketched the structure as crumbling, windowless, almost savage. Myth blossomed where impatience failed. They declared the edifice a relic from the age of Solomon, a temple disguised as a mosque, its builders swallowed by the desert's appetite. The market traders smirked, the masons bit their tongues. Reality, tucked inside local chronicles, told a softer story. The mosque was sound. True, plaster plates had sheared in places and vegetal beams jutted like fractured bones, but it was functionally strong, a living house of prayer. Myths, however, journey easier than facts. French salons in Bordeaux applauded tales of a doomed mud cathedral whose worshippers no longer understood its origin. Romanticism, with its longing for noble ruin, found a fertile clay. Yet even rumor can tighten the turn of history. By 1833, French administrative circles began speculating. Should an eventual colonial protectorate protect such curiosities or replace them with stone basilicas of empire? Reports were exchanged. One engineer suggested razing the mosque to study its foundations. Another lobbied to sheath it in burnt brick in order to save the Africans from their own negligence. Across the sea, the debate was theoretical. In Djenné, nature prepared her own argument. The year 1834 bore a monsoon of uncommon fury. The Bani River, swollen and thick, pressed against levees until they sighed open. Water coursed into the city like a guest who had forgotten his manners. Earthen houses sagged, wharf pilings moaned, and in the western corner of the mosque a long hesitant fracture widened with each tremor of saturated clay. When the storm receded, a panel the size of a dhow had peeled away, lowering an entire parapet. The building did not fall, but its wound was public and painful, an empire's twilight rendered in mud. In that wash of ruin, the French narratives gained momentum. See, the Grand Mosque crumbles. See, Africa's monuments decay. But within Djenné, a different conversation ripened, quiet and deep as groundwater. The guild of barefooted masons, inheritors of Songhai craftsmanship and distant Mande formula, met beneath a grass awning. Names were taken, tools were offered. They vowed to knit the broken flanks of their monument before colonial opinion cemented the fate of the structure forever. These guilds did not convene by chance. Each member carried lineage. One traced his forefathers to the mythical build of the first mosque in 1280. Another could quote every verse that sang of clay in the Quran. Apprentices knew the taste of the soil at three depths: surface dust, subsoil with vegetal flecks, and the dense chocolatey loam extracted just above the water table. Their pledge formed the backbone of a local resistance less loud than arms, yet equally potent, the resistance of steady maintenance. While the French debated parchment policies, the Masons acted. They quarried new earth before dawn, mixed it with rice husks and pulp baobab leaves, let the concoction stew in shallow pits. On moonlit nights, they returned to bribe collapsed walls with fresh bricks, each still warm with fermentation. Old women prayed, young men hummed the steady rhythm of hoists, minarets accepted the offerings without comment. Meanwhile, in St. Louis and later in Paris, the intellectual duel intensified. Preservationists argued for the exotic magnetism of a mud mosque silhouetted against Sahelian skies, a future postcard for the imperial imagination. Redevelopers countered, mud is impermanent, let us replace it with neat French stone and an inscription praising civilization. A smaller, colder faction suggested apathy. Ignore the site, let time erase it, and build administrative offices nearer the river port. None of these camps measured the pulse that already beat within Djenné's alleyways. Letters from the Sahel took months to arrive. By the time a final memorandum reached the Ministry of the Navy and Colonies recommending provisional studies, the Masons had finished their first round of repairs. The mosque remained chipped, patched, imperfect, yet it stood. Travelers who arrived in late 1835 found scaffolds made of split palm trunks, still leaning against its facade, like reeds against an elephant. One of them, Lieutenant Durrell, admitted in his notes, "The structure, though wounded, appears vibrant, maintained by mysterious rituals of the indigenous craft." Legend dissolved into reluctant respect. The French scientists revised earlier prints, adding scaffolding and laborers to new etchings. Discussion veered toward co-opting the guilds, perhaps employ them as native experts under French supervisors. The Masons listened, nodded politely, and returned to their own councils. They knew that control of time and clay was control of narrative. Each annual crepissage, if completed without colonial directive, testified that the community, not the empire, determined the destiny of the monument. Posterity would later read policies drafted in 1836, never ratified, recommending a pilot project, a thin lime render applied over the mud to arrest capillary action. Had it occurred, the mosque's soft curves would have hardened into brittle scabs, unable to swell and contract with the seasons. But budgets tightened, frontier wars elsewhere drained coffers, and the suggestion slept in a filing cabinet. Djenné breathed on. By 1837, the guild had formalized entry rights. Initiates learned to read the cracks like constellations, to sense, beneath bare feet, the tremble of saturated clay before a wall proclaimed its distress. They memorized proverbs: mud forgets nothing, The river writes a second Quran each flood. These sayings were not poetry alone, they formed an engineering code, a manual disguised as myth. The old structure's partial collapse had thus achieved a paradox. It weakened the walls, yet strengthened the resolve of those sworn to guard them. Colonial administrators, facing the inertia of other obligations, found that each year the case for total redesign lost urgency. Djenné's people kept patching their sanctuary faster than colonial files could advise. Still, uncertainty hung in the air like slow dust. Trade routes shifted, steamboats tested the Niger, treaties flickered on the horizon. Even the masons wondered how long their independence would last. At night, the timber pinnacles cast thin shadows across flooded courtyards, reminiscent of spears clustered before an invisible siege. The mosque had survived Songhai twilight and Moroccan incursion, but a fresher shadow, bureaucratic, methodical, now approached. Yet for the moment, 1838 dissolved into 1839 with only small tremors. French patrols appeared, drank calabashes of sour milk, noted the tranquil pulsing of a city that refused to sink. They left with politely gathered folios, reassured, or perhaps unsettled, that earth and faith could cooperate without European schematics. Locally, the Masons' Guild acquired a modest council chamber near the northern gate. Walls were painted with lime but left rough, as if to announce allegiance to impermanence. Inside, minutes were spoken, not written, because oral grain was more flexible than ink. Decisions remained fluid: where to harvest the next mound of soil, which families would donate millet straw, how to integrate a new generation of apprentices eager yet untested. The chamber smelled of damp clay and kola nut, a scent that, to the initiated, translated as continuity. From a distant vantage, the great mosque looked unchanged. Only those who traced fingertips along its surface felt the new veins of repair, seemed slightly warmer, faintly different in color. These heterodox patches whispered a lesson the French drafts never captured. Survival is a mosaic, not a monument. The 1840s waited beyond the threshold, promising rail surveys and missionary caravans. For now, starlight pressed silver coins onto the mosque's wet roofs, and the Bani River, having sown chaos 6 seasons earlier, offered mirror-still peace. Somewhere inside that hush, a lone drumbeat signaled the closing of the guild's nightly vigilance. Tools were stacked, prayers murmured, footprints wiped away. The city slept, the clay dreamed of dawn. In that dream, scents of timber tar and fresh earth drifted toward something yet unseen, a quiet experiment in hybrid architecture, where mud might one day converse with imported materials without surrendering its voice. Such contemplations belong to the coming chapter, where discussion drifts from ruin and resistance to adaptation and dialogue, as the mosque inches toward a new century under a mosaic of threats and hopes. A last hush still clings to the waterlogged plain, the lantern glow of Chapter 4 not yet gone from the inner eye. Evening vapors continue to drift above the Niger tributary, and the ear remembers the faint slap of oars against canal walls. Out of that dim after-image, a new silhouette approaches, the unmistakable bearing of a man who carries both trowel and genealogy in the same steady heartbeat. He is Ismaila Traoré, master mason of Djenné, 18th inheritor of a lineage that has kneaded earth to prayer for more than 4 centuries. Stories say his forebears first folded grass fiber into clay when Timbuktu still traded salt for Venetian glass. Their surnames are layered in town archives like sedimentary rings: Fatogoma, Mamadou, Bokar, each entrusted with secrets of mud weight, baobab sap, and the lullabies sung to bricks cooling under moonlight. By 1907, that worshipful science rests almost entirely on Ismaila's broad shoulders. He walks with the slight forward tilt of men who inspect foundations wherever they go, as though pavements might whisper structural doubts. In early sketches, his profile shows a high brow, gentle eyes, and palms thickened at the heel, palms that remember every wall they ever persuaded into plumb alignment. His mornings begin long before the muezzin. In a courtyard scented with last night's embers, he dips fingers into wet soil, pinches, tests, frowns, remembers the exact moisture ratio relayed by an uncle long dead. A single raven croak drifts overhead. He interprets it, half seriously, as a sign to be humble. For all his competence, 1907 presents a problem no ancestor faced. He must negotiate the mosque's future with France. The colonial resident posts ride daily down narrow alleys, epaulets brushing mud walls, propositions echoing in their wake. And so, on a pale January morning, Ismaila receives Captain Louis Dieterlen beneath a neem tree whose shade trembles like candle flame. Dieterlen's notebook is squared and starched. Squared also is his moustache. He speaks of hygiene reports, crowd circulation, European anxieties about stagnant air. The captain wants wider courts so municipal wagons may turn, perhaps a drainage sluice, perhaps, he suggests with a half smile, a stone cap atop the minarets so the landmark appears more permanent. Across the table, Ismaila's gaze rests on a palm thrush pecking the dust. He hears only fragments of French and replies in soft Soninke, filtered through an interpreter. Yet what happens in that slow, tri-tongued dialogue is less confrontation than duet. Dieterlen, son of a provincial architect, admits a secret admiration for Sahelian curves. He owns a watercolor of the mosque's current ruin and betrays sentimental sighs when edges crumble. Seeing this, Ismaila tilts his head, deciding the officer might understand at least a fraction of mud logic. Their compromise becomes the hybrid blueprint the town still pores over today. Existing buttresses remain, but their rhythms are smoothed so shadows fall in longer, unbroken flutes. Courtyards widen by 2 spear lengths, not for wagons, but for the swirl of market cloth and the flood crowds on festival Fridays. Minarets rise an extra 10 cubits, yet keep the swollen acorn finials beloved by marabouts. Captain Dieterlen's lone insistence, a discreet iron rod embedded invisibly in the central tower. Ismaila grants, though later he will joke that divine breath, not iron, keeps a minaret upright. In cool moonlit hours, the master sketches details with charcoal on goatskin, niches for amphorae, secret air channels along prayer halls, and a ceremonial stairway whose incline matches that of an ancestor's dream. He consults the hereditary guild, uncles, cousins, apprentices whose names borrow from winds, Kambiri, Tenere, Hami. Each suggests small tweaks, a slot for drainage here, a sacrificial beam there, the aligning of mihrab axis to the winter solstice's precise sunrise angle. Together they fold compromise into tradition until the plan settles like a resting bird. And then logistics bloom, slow and colossal, across the dry season. 14,000 wooden toran, the projecting palm wood pegs that will later serve as permanent scaffolding, must be cut, debarked, and hauled. In the willow twilight of the shallows, loggers float narrow rafts downstream, poles stacked like giant quills upon a drifting porcupine. Children run alongside, singing counting songs, Sefru Kemefila Keme Saba, 14,000 by the last refrain. Brick fields wake next. Clay is quarried from riverbanks where hippos sometimes laze. Hippos grunt, indifferent. Women scoop earth into calabashes. Men add water and chaff. Bare feet churn the mixture to a patient pulse. Sun-dried bricks lie in regimented arrays, 6 days at first, then another 3 for tempering. The smell is equal parts rainstorm memory and fresh pottery, a smell that settles on hair, bread, lullabies. Each brick bears a faint thumbprint. Ismaila insists the print stay, so future masons may sense the warmth of forgotten hands. Communal labor turns the city into a single breathing organism. Drapers leave their looms, imams their lecterns, fishers their nets. Every quarter provides a team by rotational calendar. At dawn they gather before the ruined 1834 walls presently skeletonized, plucked of old Toran and ready to be cannibalized into filler. Ismaila walks the line, voice low, offering small corrections up and down the scaffold, an arch just a hair too pinched, a buttress wanting another handful of straw. He rarely raises his voice. Authority rests in how others fall silent when he inhales. Above, the new minarets mount day by measured day. Children perched on roofs play guessing games about final height. Rumors claim a Fulani herder 2 valleys away can already spot the tower tip at sunset. Others scoff, say only the herder's cattle see so far. Inside the prayer hall, pillars thicken like baobab trunks, their girth cooling the air. At mid-construction, a traveling Tuareg poet likens the unfinished void to a lung awaiting its first chant of Allahu Akbar. She offers the simile to Ismaila. He nods, stores the phrase inside his quietly growing legend. Toran insertion days are festival days unto themselves. The Carpenter Guild swings each beam skyward, rows of men on ropes chanting a call and response older than Mali's first empire. With every wooden tooth hammered home, the facade assumes its prickly crown. birds alight almost at once, convinced the structure is an eccentric cousin of the region's kapok trees. From afar, the mosque now resembles something grown rather than built, a coral reef of earth. When the last brick dries, the town slumps in shared exhaustion, but only briefly, for inauguration morning peers over the horizon with the patience of a camel caravan. April light spills across fresh plaster, glazed still with dew. Processions gather, marabouts in white, potters in red-striped paniers, French officers in ceremonial blue. Dieterlen appears beside Ismaila, hat removed, a sign of respect unlikely noted in colonial dispatches. Drummers keep a pulse beneath the hum of expectation. Above them nimbostratus clouds drift just enough to veil the sun, lending the scene a diffused, almost studio-lit calm. Anecdotes sprout like tamarind shoots. One grandmother later recalls a goat squeezing between marshals to sniff the new threshold, as if verifying craftsmanship. A market girl claims the mortar steam outlined a fleeting angel along the eastern wall. No one else saw it, though several pretend they did. A minor bureaucrat, bored, times the echo of the inaugural takbir and proudly reports a reverberation almost twice that of the old mosque. A scientific triumph of acoustics, he scribbles, unaware that the effect comes largely from mud's generous resonance. Contemporary reactions wander along predictable and surprising paths. Local traders, eyeing the enlarged courtyard, quickly calculate that twice the number of millet sacks can be unloaded during Monday markets. Sufi mystics comment instead on the added height. They sense new ladders for the faithful's prayers to climb. Parisian newspapers run a slender column titled "An Adobe Cathedral Rises in French Sudan," praising Dieterlen's oversight and mentioning Traoré only in a closing footnote. Back in Djenné, elders gather under a baobab, debating whether the central nave feels cooler. Most agree it does, crediting shaded vents that Ismaila slipped into the cornice line. Children add the Toran pegs to their nightly counting games, a lullaby whose numbers wander past 14,000 before small voices drift into sleep. For Ismaila, the most lasting tribute arrives quietly at dusk. He stands alone, palm on the new Chibla wall, and feels it radiate the day's trapped warmth. In that pulse, he senses the layered heartbeats of his lineage, the whispered arguments with Dieterlen, the laughter of brickmakers, the droning chants of rope pullers. He senses, too, tomorrow's inexorable erosion. Termites will gnaw, rains will pool, and one day the walls must be plastered again by hands not yet born. He breathes out, long and even, like a mason smoothing a final trowel line, and lets the truth settle. Permanence here is not in earth, but in ritual renewal. Evening returns, as it always does, with moths orbiting the lanterns now clamped to fresh Toran. The courtyard empties gradually. Shadows lean eastward and lie down to rest. Somewhere inside the new walls, a single child's prayer lifts, modest and thin, then disappears into the cooling vault, absorbed as completely as water into sand. The mosque stands not silent but content, aware that the labor of many has arranged a shelter for quiet breaths. Night deepens, yet on the horizon another inquiry waits, the matter of annual resurfacing, of the grand crepissage that will soon christen these infant walls with their first sacramental coat. That slow ritual, equal parts maintenance and celebration, holds its own stories of ladders, laughter, and river mud. Its gentle rhythms will guide the drift into Chapter 6, where fresh plaster meets recurring memory under the pale Sahelian dawn. The last chapter settled beneath a violet sky, where the final echo of the call to prayer folded into dusk and left the great mosque draped in a dreamy hush. Against that lingering glow, the mud-bred walls seemed to breathe, inhaling the night air as though preparing to share a deeper secret. It is from that tranquil pause, where sound, light, and heat all appeared to slow, that this examination of the mosque's silent skeleton begins. Banco, the very earth-based flesh of the mosque, is more than a fortunate pile of mud. In the Sahel it starts with laterite, an iron-rich soil tinged red by hematite and goethite. Crushed under wooden pestles, sifted through woven trays, and watered until supple, the laterite is scarcely alone. Rice husk is kneaded in next, each brittle flake supplying a lattice of silica that interrupts shrinkage cracks and invites pockets of insulating air. Finally, cow dung, rich with digested cellulose and microbes, catalyzes slow fermentation, coaxing clay particles to align like careful bricks within bricks. After resting beneath thatched shade, the mixture becomes a mellow, malleable paste, known locally as banco, ready to be lifted into form by patient hands. Within each sun-dried brick, physics slumbers. Laterite's iron oxide grains grant density, density grants thermal mass. Daytime sun pours onto the walls, yet the heat travels inward at a languid pace, as if wading through honey. By the time warmth reaches the interior, evening breezes have already fallen, so the heat barely kisses the cool prayer hall before reversing direction toward the night sky. In this slow exchange, temperature swings are muffled, granting occupants a temperate refuge, even when the Sahel's noon shivers with fierce light. The rice husk, seemingly fragile, plays a strange dual role, delaying heat flow further while lending the brick enough resilience to survive wet season swelling. Moisture in these lands is precious, yet it is also a sly adversary. Here cow dung intervenes again. Fibrous lignin strands tighten the matrix, while natural salts render the banco slightly hydrophobic. During torrential monsoon bursts, water sheets off instead of biting deep. When puddles linger at the base, dung-bred enzymes arrest the microbial feasts that usually erode raw earth. The science is not lab-born but field-seasoned, refined by centuries of masons reading the cracks and listening to the mud's faint creak underfoot. Beyond each brick, structural choreography continues in vertical rhythms, the buttresses. Rising like pleated curtains, these tapered wings cradle the main walls and soften the jump from ground to parapet. Load distribution is their overt role. The buttress feet spread the mosque's ponderous mass across a wider footprint, keeping each course below compression limits. Yet their quieter gift is shading. Early light strikes one flank, afternoon light strikes the other. The core between remains in near-permanent penumbra, a carefully modulated shield that further blunts thermal spikes. When rain hammers in near horizontal sheets, buttress ridges behave like structural umbrellas, breaking raindrop momentum so the central wall films rather than soaks. Where cracks are unavoidable, they tend to form within the vertical grooves of the buttress, isolating damage from more delicate flat expanses. Exiting each buttress, the eye meets the toron, hundreds of wooden beams that protrude like rhythmic staccato across the facade. At first, the toron looks decorative, almost whimsical, but each piece of palm or acacia is a ready-made scaffold, awaiting the annual festival of replastering. During that ritual, villagers climb from beam to beam, renewing the banco skin in a communal rite that is equal parts maintenance, faith, and celebration. Beyond scaffolding, toron conveys secrets about moisture. Wood swells when humidity rises, contracting again under the dry Saharan harmattan wind. A seasoned mason glances at the toron ends, noting the mm-wide misalignments, and can predict which wall planes are hiding dampness inside. Thus, the mosque signals its needs like a living patient, requesting care in a language of subtle geometry. Earthen architecture is not exclusively Sahelian, of course. Across the Atlantic, in New Mexico's Rio Grande Valley, adobe missions bake beneath a different sun, but the science is kin. There, volcanic sand pairs with straw and water, omitting lateritic iron, yet achieving similar thermal mass. The desert's diurnal range, hot days, cold nights, mirrors Sahelian swings, so thick adobe walls dampen extremes in much the same way. Bricks set by Spanish colonists borrowed from Puebloan methods, and their buttresses, though fewer, share that load-spreading fan at the base. Yet New Mexican adobe confronts freeze-thaw cycles foreign to Djenné. To counter them, lime renders or mud topped with cactus juice seal surfaces each autumn, whereas Sahelian banco relies on temperature moderation alone, freed from icy expansion's destructive prees. Half a world east, Yemeni highlanders stack multi-storied mud towers in Wadi Hadramaut. Their kasab bricks, cured with straw like New Mexican counterparts, are leaner, less lateritic, more silty, and sometimes stabilized with gypsum. Instead of toron, timber tie beams lace the interior floors, bracing walls against the region's occasional tremors. Yet familiar physics persists. Thick walls lag heat, small windows ration glare, and outer plaster, harsher in lime and ash, resists monsoon arcs from the Indian Ocean. Djenné's masons would recognize the logic, though they might smile at Yemen's habit of painting white gypsum frills along cornices, a flourish that seems superfluous when the banco itself can gleam under the Malian sun. Across these geographies, the core questions echo. How can earth stay dry? How can walls stay cool? And how can weight settle gently on yielding ground? Each region offers a variation on the same measured answer. Mix soils to suit, thicken where needed, vent when possible, and listen to the quiet cues of color, crack, and touch. In the Great Mosque, the recipe's precision is felt with every footstep on the courtyard's powdery crust. No binder is wasted, no fiber is arbitrary. Clay platelets orient parallel to load lines, straw shards float perpendicular, and mineral nodules wedge themselves at just enough spacing to preempt fracture. Hidden within the sunlit calm is thermodynamic ballet. The brick's specific heat rises with iron content, their conductivity falls with organic fiber, diffusivity, that marriage of both, aligns to a sweet spot at which the mosque's interior lags peak exterior temperature by almost 6 hours. In morning prayer, chill lingers joyfully. At evening prayer, stored warmth returns like a gentle exhalation. The fluctuations slow metabolic rates in occupants, lowering heartbeats, inviting contemplation. Mosque and human body sync with one another, each regulating the other's temperature and spirit. When the rains finally break the April calm, the buttresses answer first. Water arcs against their tapered shoulders, vents down their draped channels, and pools in shallow gullies purposely carved at their feet. Porous banco drinks a measured sip, swelling just enough to close microfissures opened by dry season shrinkage. In those moments, the Toran softens, its wooden grains plumping, pushing outwards. A young mason may see the beams no longer stand proud, but sit almost flush. That is the sign to schedule the annual replastering, while the surface remains saturated, for adhesion is strongest when clay, straw, and dung meet the wall already awake with moisture. Comparisons with fired brick or concrete often fixate on compressive strength, but for banco, the decisive virtue is compatibility with climate. Fired brick blocks heat too fast, scorching the interior before nightfall. Portland cement, with its impermeability, traps dampness inside, risking mold and salt bloom. Banco, willingly moderate, breathes at a velocity tuned to Sahelian seasons, neither too slow to perspire nor too quick to parch. It is that middle path that transforms a fragile earthen pile into a century-spanning monument. Behind every cubic meter of banco rests social calculus. Rice husk arrives from the dath, seasonal harvest. Cow dung forms at the village edge where herds bed for the night. These inputs tether architecture to agronomy. Should drought shrink the rice crop, husk ratios drop, bricks grow brittle, and the walls hint at hunger long before granaries empty. Architecture becomes an analog barometer of community health. In the dusty lanes flanking the mosque, elders recall years when Toran beams sagged earlier than usual, and they knew to ration millet. Science here speaks softly through warped wood and widening cracks, but its message is never mistaken. On moonlit nights, the buttresses cast crenellated shadows on the courtyard floor, a second facade made solely of voids. Those voids cool faster than solids, pulling faint breezes downward. Even when the air seems still, heat can be felt slipping toward those darker silhouettes, guided by slight pressure gradients created by different cooling rates. In such a scene, banco's role as thermal conductor and radiative participant becomes almost palpable, though in truth it is only obeying the simplest thermodynamic urge: warm surfaces seek cold skies. Far away in New Mexico, high desert chill carves analogous voids along the adobe buttresses of San Esteban del Rey Mission at Acoma. Up the slopes of Yemen's Shibam, windows slit open after sundown to exhale daytime heat, much as the Great Mosque releases its own. Three cultures, distinct in script and rite, converge in that nightly ritual of mud releasing sun from its grasp. Thus the Great Mosque is less an isolated marvel and more a node in a global colloquy of earth, fiber, water, and intention. Its banco walls whisper with the same syllables uttered by mesas and wadis, yet rearranged into grammar made sacred by worship and by need. Observing the Toran shift, the buttress darken, or the brick sigh underhand is to touch that conversation mid-sentence. Soon, attention will move from static material to living ritual, from watt hours stored in mud to prayers, chants, and communal plastering songs that renew the very skin now scrutinized. As tonight deepens, the walls recline beneath the first scatter of stars, preparing for stories less about stress diagrams and more about human hands gathering to keep the monument alive. In that gentle anticipation, the great mass sleeps on, and the tale drifts toward its next chapter where craft, ceremony, and collective memory intertwine in the cool whisper of pre-dawn air. Twilight had only just surrendered its final mauve embers to the velvet Sahel sky when the hush of anticipation settled over Djenné. In the half-light, the great earthen bulwarks of the mosque appeared to breathe, exhaling warm memories of an earlier chapter's geometry and echoing vaults. Soon, night would tilt toward dawn, and with the turning would come the deep, round heartbeat of the Nagara drum. Every household knew the cadence. It was the pulse that braided craft, faith, and village chronicle into an annual promise. Tomorrow the walls would be reborn. Stall-keepers folded their fabric roofs, masons fingered wooden Toran pegs, and elder storytellers set aside folded leather folios, letting silence build a gentle bridge between contemplation and action. Somewhere a single balafon phrase drifted, like a lantern of sound, hinting at the slow procession that would rise with the first pale stripe of morning. Before the sun's rim breached the horizon, the drummer returned, this time with companions. Bass gourds rumbled, iron bells clinked, and a chant unfurled, naming each quarter of the town in measured stanzas. The call functioned as a living map: Koro, Sankore, Yobuka, Timbuktu Serbani. At every syllable, doors opened. Men emerged barefooted, palms already powdered with the memory of clay. Women balanced wide calabashes, their scarves the color of pomegranates and river reeds. Children skipped between ankles, rehearsing lines of the crepissage song in shy whispers. No command had been issued, no roster posted on the council wall. Yet the decades, even centuries, of rehearsed togetherness allowed limbs and intentions to mesh as smoothly as the pottery wheels turning. The festival of repair was both duty and gentle lullaby, allowing the town to awaken not with alarm, but with the sleepy confidence of travelers who have walked the path many times. At the riverbank, dawn mist curled like pale silk over the water, softening boat hulls and slatted baskets into faint silhouettes. This was the women's locus of preparation. Kneeling at the edge, they scooped river silt into woven pans, lifting each load with a slow rotation that let unwanted pebbles wink away. Millet stalk ash, ground baobab leaf, and fermented rice hulls waited in shallow pits farther up the slope. Older grandmothers presided over the mixing bowls, their wrists moving with unhurried certainty, adding handfuls of ash to temper expansion, threads of honey to coax adhesion, a drizzle of shea butter for pliancy. Each gesture summoned a lineage, granddaughters learning recipes without words, cousins humming the minor harmonies that keep time when spoken count would feel too jarring. The slurry acquired the hue of warm café au lait and a fragrance like distant rain on distant soil, calming, familiar. While the mud matured, the men ascended. Toran beams, jutting like ladders of timber tusks, welcomed calloused feet and balanced weight. Up along the parapets, sleeves were rolled, not in haste but in ceremonial deliberation, as though each forearm revealed carried its own prayer. Small repair knives glinted in the newborn light, collecting echoes of gold from the east. Some cracks merely required a caress of fresh slip, others a deep filling where last season's harmattan winds had scooped away entire scoops of material. Yet the choreography remained stately, almost drowsy, tension dispersed by the knowledge that no singular mason bore responsibility. Hands overlapped, thumbs pressed over the same groove, jokes passed like cooled tea. Beneath the climbing figures, the children arranged themselves in arcs, their songs steady as a metronome, syllables rising in a scale that instructed which facade to approach next. Music functioned as blueprint, as gentle overseer. Mid-morning arrived, imperceptible as eyelids closing. By now, the sacred slurry had thickened to the consistency of slow yogurt. Women formed a double line from river to mosque, ferrying calabashes atop crowns padded by rings of coiled cloth. The procession glided more than it walked. Hips swayed in unison, gowns brushing dust into miniature clouds that sparkled and settled. At a wooden scaffold base, the bowls transferred upward, one level at a time, changing hands like drowsy constellations migrating across a hushed cosmos. No shout punctured the flow. Instead, low hums synchronized breath, and occasional laughter folded into the quiet rhythm like tassels into a rug pattern. The men received the mud with soft nods, spreading it in arcs that mirrored the women's stride below. Crescent strokes met vertical sweeps, sealing fissures, thickening buttresses, leaving behind a sheen that caught the noon sun and made the facade shimmer like wet bark. Often overlooked by distant observers is the second text inscribed in this ritual: reconciliation. Between handfuls of clay, neighbors whose polite greetings had frozen under the weight of unresolved quarrels found themselves side by side on a narrow ledge. The mud bowl offered neutrality. Its round lip, slick with water and earth, supplied a subject safe enough for first words. One man pointed to a hairline crack, another to the angle of a broken toron. Suggestions became dialogue. Dialogue softened into apology. Down below, women from rival households timed their steps to the same humming scale, discovering a shared tempo that eased grudges born of market disputes or inheritance debates. By sunset, the walls were smoother, but hearts too bore a fresh cooling layer. Elders later remarked that the mosque stood firm because grievances were plastered before they hardened, the structure absorbing tension and returning equanimity, like a reservoir releasing gathered rain. Across the square, artisans capitalized on the pause between layers. Potters displayed bowls whose surfaces mimicked the swirling pattern of the wet walls. Indigo dyers laid out cloth that caught the same changing light. Leatherworkers tooled satchels embossed with miniature Toron motifs. Trade booths creaked open like sleepy petals, the low chatter of bargaining threading through the percussive scrape of trowels. Visitors from Bamako, Timbuktu, and farther coastlines moved carefully, as though entering a sanctuary they did not yet understand. Their coin purses glittered, encouraging further craft. Yet the town resisted the rush of carnival. Prices remained moderate, meals were served on woven mats without haggling, and storytellers guided guests with unhurried courtesy, ensuring that commerce remained braided to reverence. Revenue, though welcome, followed the rhythm of the drum rather than eclipsing it. In this balance, Djenné found sustenance, walls mended, dignity intact, coffers replenished just enough for the cycle ahead. Afternoon light slanted low, turning fresh plaster into a palette of ochre, amber, and roseate bronze. On the highest ridgepole, a final trail of mud was pressed into place, the men's knuckles tracing a slow farewell curve before descending. Below, women rinsed calabashes in the river, watching ripples carry away silt and stray bits of straw, as though the water itself were collecting stories to relay to the delta. Children collapsed beneath neem trees, still singing but in half-formed syllables, dreamlike, drifting between worlds. Elders approached the facade, palms raised not in inspection but benediction. Fingertips brushed the new skin of the mosque and withdrew, leaving no dent. Satisfaction traveled through the crowd like the quietest breath. The monument lived another year, and the community, by tending it, had refreshed its own marrow. A gentle, collective exhale mingled with the sigh of evening wind curling from the desert rim. Nightfall introduced oil lamps and hushed storytelling circles. Plates of rice with peanut sauce, thick and fragrant, traveled from hand to hand, while distant drums continued, now softened, a sleepy metronome anchoring dreams. Tourists lingered at the periphery, capturing impressions in notebooks more than cameras, aware that flash would bruise the serenity. In one corner, a mediator from the town council recorded the day's resolved disputes, each entry beginning with the same phrase, plastered together. His ink glided like a tributary into broader civic ledgers. The marketplace wound down slowly, resistance to closure dissolving under the mutual awareness that tomorrow's market would benefit from today's restraint. Above all, the mosque loomed luminous, moonlight stippling its contours, Toron shadows stretching like resting cattle across the courtyard. Even birds nesting among the beams seemed unhurried, adjusting feathers with languid precision, as though mirroring the town's exhausted but contented pulse. Before sleep claimed the alleyways, a final gesture unfolded. The chief drummer paced the empty square, touching the drumhead once for every pillar that rings the mosque, counting silently into the night air. No audience remained, yet the ritual completed the circle, sealing sound within freshly cured walls. Issuing no command, he simply placed the instrument upside down beside the threshold, a quiet promise that the next morning would begin with a softer rhythm, one suited to drying clay rather than mixing it. Stars wheeled overhead, their reflections caught in puddles left by rinsed bowls, miniature heavens awaiting evaporation. In that silvered stillness, Djenné drifted toward dreams of silted rivers and caravans yet to arrive. The great earthen monument stood watch, its skin supple, its memory reacquainted with moisture and forgiveness. Tomorrow, attention would turn inward to the mosque's shadowed chambers, where geometry and acoustics intertwine like vines, an exploration reserved for the chapters ahead. As the last echo of the wooden Toron beams we contemplated in Chapter 7 drifts away, the evening air around the great Mosque of Djenné cools to a hushed velvet. The sun that a heartbeat ago still grazed the parapets has slipped lower, drawing its apricot glow across the mud-plastered walls. In that lingering warmth, you might almost feel the memory of hands, the countless hands of masons and worshippers, resting upon the surface, sharing a slow breath with the clay. Let us remain in that hush for a while, and let it guide us toward the ornamented language that lives upon and within these earthen plains. The eye, adjusting to the settling dusk, rises first to the three principal minarets, those tapering giants that preside in calm authority over the town's flat roofs and market stalls. Their silhouette is simple at first glance, gently stepped buttresses, pierced by narrow grooves, surmounted by rounded eggs that catch the last available light. Yet a quieter observation reveals a living texture. Each ridge softens into the next. Each Toron peg casts a slender shadow that lengthens as the sky turns indigo. The minarets do not only stand, they breathe, they remember. Local legend speaks of the mosque as a motherly presence, her three towers like braided hair or like fingers raised in blessing. To gaze at them at this hour feels a little like leaning against the pulse of the city itself, feeling it slow into night. And then there is the egg, more precisely the ostrich egg, one perched atop each spire. Ivory pale, faintly luminescent in twilight, they appear almost weightless, as though the minarets had exhaled and blown three shimmering bubbles skyward. The custom is older than written memory. Some recount that the eggs invoke fertility, not only the fertility of women in fields, but the generative rhythm of flood and silt that has long bound Djenné to the Niger and the Bani. Others whisper that an egg on high wards off lightning, because the sky, seeing its own power so delicately cradled, stays its hand. There are even murmurs of pre-Islamic guardianship, tokens set out for wandering spirits known to ride the upper winds. Whatever tale you prefer, the egg remains a promise, life held gently, publicly, and with hope. Let your gaze drift downward now, where the facade unfolds in a slow procession of niches and pilasters. In this half-light, the architectural lines soften. They seem more like the edges of distant dunes than rigid walls. Pilasters step forward and withdraw in a steady rhythm, shaping shallow recesses that drink the darkness. These setbacks, no more than a few handspans deep, nevertheless make a theater of the simplest elements: light, shadow, texture. During the day, sunlight marches across these plains, abrading the clay with white brilliance, then surrendering it to shade. At night, the moon traces a subtler choreography. The result is never fixed. It is an endless performance in which the building teaches the hour and the season by the angle of its own shadow. Inside the niches, sometimes you notice the faint ghost of an older line, a seam where a prior surface met a newer skin. Because the mosque is replastered year after year, each coat contains, like tree rings, the memory of a specific rainy season, a specific gathering of townsfolk, each singing, laughing, or silently focusing on the work. The niches, therefore, are not empty. They are full of time. They drink it in, one layer at a time, storing it like cool water behind a well's stony lip. Slip quietly through the carved wooden door, and we come to the dim vastness of the prayer hall. The earthen pillars that carry the roof feel closer together in the evening hush, like forest trunks at night. Lamps glow, soft and amber, but for the moment hold your attention on the mihrab, the wall niche indicating the direction of Mecca. Here geometry gathers itself into a kind of whispered logic. The niche is a pointed arch set within deep, rounded folds of clay. Concentric ridges encircle it, climbing higher with each ring, suggesting billowed cloth or waves caught in mid-curl. Stand a pace before that niche and intone a single syllable, a gentle ah, and you will feel the sound lean back at you. The curvature of the mihrab, the narrowness of the adjoining aisle, and the mud's particular density together create an acoustic cocoon. Words spoken here seem to hover, vowels stretch, consonants thrum. Ancient imams, local singers, and modern acousticians all remark on this phenomenon with equal wonder. Some argue it is intentional design, others fortunate accident. Either way, the mihrab does not merely point toward a distant city. It points inward, highlighting the corridor between breath and ear, between thought and devotion. Just beside that niche, if you stoop a little, you can trace with a fingertip the faint channel of calligraphic motifs pressed into wet clay generations ago. Unlike high stone reliefs that boast their form, these inscriptions murmur. They lie shallow, as if reluctant to disturb the wall's serene flatness. Arabic characters extend and loop, then dissolve at their tips into tiny vegetal spirals, a vocabulary of devotion married to the memory of leaves swaying on riverbanks. During construction, craftsmen pressed reed styluses or even the blunt ends of feathers into the wall while the mix was still malleable. Because earth shifts and ages, some letters have blurred, some strokes have sunk, and yet the overall cadence remains legible. To read it is to acknowledge that text, too, is mortal, and that its slow wearing is simply another recitation of all things return. Beneath the fresh coats, beneath even the oldest calligraphy, other stories linger. Scholars armed with magnetometers and ground-penetrating radar have hinted at patterns that predate Islam: serpentine curves, sunburst rosettes, and stylized horns. Local tales speak of Djenné's earlier shrines where spirits of river and forest were honored. When the mosque rose, much of that earlier vocabulary slipped discreetly under new plaster. Yet traces persist like faint dreams remembered at dawn. They do not conflict with the present faith. Instead, they remain as quiet tributaries feeding a larger stream. In the same way that ostrich eggs allow the desert wind to converse with the Quranic verse, these buried motifs permit earlier prayers to hum softly beneath newer ones. It is tempting to peel back every layer, to expose, date, catalog, and mount each fragment of pigment or incised line. But the mosque itself seems to discourage an intrusive hand. Its surface heals swiftly, gratefully, whenever fresh mud is laid on. It prefers, perhaps, that we learn to hear through the earthen hush rather than breaking it. And so, standing in the cool corridor, we accept that the unseen may remain unseen, that some symbols may rest in gentle obscurity. What matters is that the structure is vast enough to shelter all its meanings, declared and hidden, sacred and folk, present and remembered. Step back once more into the courtyard. Night has gathered fully now. The ostrich eggs atop the minarets glow faintly in captured starlight, pale lanterns nested in air. The facade, stripped of daylight, offers only suggestion. A dark plain breathed upon by moonshine, its niches and pilasters read as variations in softness rather than in depth. The mosque appears to exhale, and the town exhales with it. Somewhere nearby, a vendor closes the lid of a wooden chest. A child calls for a mother. A solitary drumbeat meanders across the rooftops, then fades. All the while, the great earthen monument stands patient, its textures cooling, its legends settling into the clay like silt into riverbed. Tomorrow, when doubt first light returns, townsfolk will gather for another day of living prayer, mixing mud, mending cracks, teaching children to listen for echoes under the vaults. But that is a gentler rhythm we shall follow soon enough. For now, let us linger in this moment where ornament becomes atmosphere, where symbolism hums just below the threshold of words, and where the layers of faith, story, and soil lie pressed together, warm as bodies sleeping side by side. In our next chapter, we will leave the quiet of representations and step into the choreography of care itself, into the annual festival of replastering, where buckets, chants, and laughter turn maintenance into celebration. Yet for the time being, remain still, and feel how the night air, threaded with clay's faint perfume, wraps the old stories like a quilt around the dreaming town. As dusk settled over the earthen buttresses, we closed the previous chapter with the hush of prayer drums fading into the warm, loamy breath of the Bani floodplain. The last image we carried was the gleam of shallow water curling around the mosque's reflection, a mirror trembling under pastel sky. That tender image stays with us now as we slip, half dreaming, into the delicate theme of fragility, how a changing climate, uncertain politics, and competing notions of stewardship press their long, patient fingers against the clay ribs of Djenné's great sanctum. Each year, the river rewrites its own story. Rain born hundreds of kilometers upstream cascades through Guinea, Mali, and Burkina Faso before wandering onto the inland delta like an unhurried guest. In wet cycles of recent decades, sudden pulses have swollen beyond memory, pushing the Bani to gnaw fresh gullies, strand islands of millet, and lick at the mosque's outer skirt. Scholars call them flood events, a term as tidy as a spreadsheet. The Masons call them simply too much water, delivered in the pre-dawn dark when even the marabouts sleep. When the current diverts only a handbreadth west, the topography of devotion must adjust. Contours once solid enough to anchor market stalls dissolve overnight, carrying sedges and gossip downstream. The oldest brick marking the Chibla facade dates to 1907, yet it has already watched the Bani shift its attitude 4 times. Hydrologists plot those shifts with GPS pins. Townspeople remember them by which childhood courtyard ended up ruined, which fig tree uprooted, which funeral prayer had to be hurried before the platform was lost to rising silt. Memory and measurement meet in soggy footprints. The water's withdrawal is never tidy. It leaves slow-breathing puddles under porticos, damp pockets within the thick banco walls where microbes feast in the dark. Capillary action ferries salts upward, painting ghostly white blooms on sunlit surfaces. Weeks later, visitors misread those crystalline fans as decorative plaster. In truth, they are quiet warnings, the bones of dissolved earth pushed outward by chemistry no amulet can forbid. Masons must scrape them carefully, muttering verses, then apply a poultice of fresh mud, sand, rice husk, and shea butter, an exfoliation ritual for architecture. Yet if the water speaks in surges, the sun answers with long silences. Hotter dry seasons have stretched from March into July, pressing the clay into a brittle trance. Micro-fissures creep along parapet crests like hairline dreams, almost invisible until a fingertip catches on their edges. In interior chambers, the air grows powdered, a faint scent of baked earth replacing incense. Children climbing the buttress stairs knock crumbs of plaster free with each sandal. These fractures are not spectacular. They are instead an incremental forgetting, the structure quietly losing confidence in its own cohesion. Political currents, less predictable than the river, have also bent against the mosque. In seasons when the state is distracted by conflict, budgets for heritage vanish first. Checkpoints multiply on regional roads, and the annual convoy of palm mat tents, barrels of puddled clay, and singing volunteers that once defined the crepissage pilgrimage is thinned by fear. Elders recall years when the entire town arrived with calabashes. Now permissions, curfews, and mistrust add a colder layer atop the sun-hardened walls. Fragility, we sense, is not only physical but social, the scaffold of collaboration itself beginning to sway. Without the communal surge of hands, maintenance slips from ritual to patchwork. Individual households tend the section nearest their rooftop, producing a quilt of subtly different mud tones. Ochre here, gray there, some speckled with straw like shared bread, others smooth, glossy as pottery. The uniform skin that once signified unity is mottled, and rainwater explores the seams with opportunistic fingers. In the quiet heat of midday, a lone mason may stand on scaffolding of millet stalks, murmuring an ayat to steady his ladder. Reverence remains, but its cadence is thin and individual, a hushed solo. Enter the white SUVs of UNESCO, arriving like cautious constellations on the dusty square. Their cargo, tripod-mounted laser scanners that emit invisible webs across the facade, tapeless rulers that transform geometry into data clouds. At night, the devices pulse faintly green, and children gather at a distance, believing perhaps that the mosque is learning new prayers in luminous script. The technicians speak of millimetric precision, digital twins, and resilience modeling. The imam, wrapped in indigo for the meeting, nods politely while his eyes rest on a shallow crack climbing the mihrab niche like a thirsty vine. With dawn comes a faint buzzing, not of bees but of drones tracing slow rectangles above minarets. Their cameras glide over pinnacles of mud, mapping not only present contours but the tiny deviations that may predict tomorrow's fracture. The pilot kneels in the shade of an acacia, face lit by tablet glow. To him, the mosque appears as a textured topography of pixels. To the rooster across the market, it is still simply the tallest perch in town. Two visions share the same sky, both sincere, each incomplete. Later, behind the prefecture, a small shed shelters a prototype nozzle fed by slurries of clay. Engineers whisper about 3D mud printing, about depositing layers and spirals that could reinforce buttresses without scaffolds. They print test cylinders no taller than a goat's horn. The sun cracks them before evening. Still they persist, adjusting ratios, adding nere pod fibers, chanting numbers like invocations. Onlookers marvel yet wonder. If the ancestors already wrote the perfect recipe in the mosque's silhouette, what wisdom is found in these extruded spirals that crumble in a single afternoon? Among the masons, respect is earned by the steadiness of one's wrist when smoothing a curve. Digital elevation models do not dampen their pride. They merely float beside it like foreign ghosts. A senior mason named Yarrow runs his palm across a laser plot printed on glossy paper, studying the contour lines as if feeling pulses. He smiles, folds the sheet, and says almost to himself that maps are good, but the wall also listens. You must knock, you must taste the mud. His apprentices chuckle, partly amused, partly relieved that their real teacher remains the wall. Critique is voiced softly in Djenné, often during tea poured high to cool. Some question whether heritage stamps and international funds arrive with fine print that dilutes local agency. Others worry that the mosque is becoming an object of study more than a vessel of worship. Its surfaces read by satellites, while the verses recited within blur into background noise. A young schoolteacher recounts how drone pilots requested temporary closure of the courtyard for calibration. She wonders aloud who decides when prayer bows to measurement, and who will mediate when the two calendars collide. Still, in the coolness of evening, drums find their way back to the square, and recitation rolls across adobe like a low tide. The mosque, though fragile, remains profoundly alive. Its vulnerabilities invite touch, invite story. Every crack, every salt blossom, every newly printed mud spiral is a punctuation mark in a long collaborative text authored by weather, politics, and belief. To observe that text is not only to conserve but to participate. The quiet watchers, whether holding laptops or calabashes, are folded into the narrative simply by standing in that amber light. Listen closely, and you can almost hear the structure inhale, exhale, clay absorbing dusk's moisture, then releasing it to the stars. Fragility, then, is not a failing but a rhythm, a reminder that permanence was never the promise of earth. The great mosque endures precisely because it is allowed to bruise, heal, and bruise again. Floods will come, salts will bloom, politics will stumble, lasers will flash, hands will caress new coats of mud. The edifice survives not by resisting change, but by folding change into its very definition of self. Archival specialists unfold linen bundles of crumbling manuscripts in an adjacent room, photographing pages that once recorded seasonal heights of the Bani in flowing Arabic calligraphy. The ink has bled where floods entered the library decades ago, leaving outlines of letters that resemble ripples. Those digital images will join servers in Paris and Bamako, where algorithms will attempt to reconstruct missing ligatures. Yet the librarian insists on reading aloud each preserved verse, letting sound accompany sight, because data, he says, is only a husk without the vibration of voice. The scanners pause to listen. And so we rest for a moment beneath the waning moon, watching faint phosphorescence fade from the scanner's tripod, listening to the murmur of distant water finding its new channel. In our final chapter, we will return at first light to consider the human heartbeat within these walls, the cadences of prayer, market, and memory that have balanced fragility with grace for centuries. Let the stars drizzle soft silver over the minarets, and let your breathing synchronize with the slow, steady settling of the desert night. For now, let the night breeze carry these reflections across the silent courtyard, and allow yourself the gentle drift between vigilance and dream. As the craftsman's palm settled against the cooling mud in our previous chapter, the wet imprint of his fingers held the last ember of daylight, a quiet exhale after hours of rhythmic labor. That fading warmth now slips into evening, and together we drift onward, letting the echo of his steady breathing become the pulse of this final reflection. The great Mosque of Djenné stands, not as an immutable monument carved from stone, but as an enormous breathing diary of clay, rewritten year after year. For architects of the 21st century, its lesson whispers through the hush of Sahelian dusk. A building can be temporary in body, yet timeless in spirit. Earthen walls, drawn from the very soil that cradle the city in return. They buffer heat by day, hold cool by night, and when rain inevitably softens their edges, they ask only for another loving layer of mud, another conversation with the hands of their makers. Think of sustainability, then, not as a checklist, but as a lullaby, slow, repetitive, soothing. Djenné's bricks require no blast furnace, no steel skeleton reaching for skies. They require patient sun, river water, straw, and communal trust. Carbon remains locked in the ground, while embodied memory rises gently toward the clouds. In the fragile hush of twilight, the mosque tells us that the greenest future may lie in remembering what brown earth already knows. That future here is a village ritual. Each year, when cracks appear and the first storms gather, the entire community answers. Children carry gourds of water, elders mix banco slurry, and neighbors pause shopfront chatter to pass the new clay up the scaffold like Toran. The walls are repaired not by a distant contractor, but by the same voices that pray within them. Stewardship is not an afterthought, it is the architecture. Maintenance becomes festival, maintenance becomes memory, and the building's longevity is measured in shared laughter as much as in structural strength. Contrast this with the vertiginous cities many of us inhabit. Forests of concrete, perched on pilings of carbon, their glassy skins shrugging off touch. When they crack, cranes arrive, money flows, and the work is hidden behind safety netting. Djenné invites us to imagine another urban rhythm, streets where walls can be patched with the soil beneath one's feet, where citizens are caretakers, and where impermanence is met not with alarm, but with ritual. These whispers travel far. In the cool classrooms of Copenhagen, rammed earth prototypes rise beside photovoltaic labs. In São Paulo, architects test adobe composites that breathe in tropical humidity. From Rajasthan to New Mexico, vernacular materials, once dismissed as primitive, return like long-lost relatives, bringing recipes for comfort without combustion. The Great Mosque is their elder, blinking patiently under a crescent moon, reminding each experimenter that humility toward place is the first design principle. Now let us picture a closing montage. Night has deepened. Stars dust the sky with silver grains. The mosque's Toran spikes cast elongated silhouettes, combs of darkness across the courtyard. A single call to prayer unfurls, low and unhurried, its syllables gliding over rooftops, around market stalls, and out toward the river's ink-black ribbon. Mud walls answer with a soft echo, as though the building itself is humming a lullaby back to the faithful. In that dialogue between human voice and earthen mass, permanence is redefined, not a fortress resisting time, but a cadence sustained through time, not an edifice frozen, but a song continuously sung. Dear listener, as your own room settles into silence, allow this gentle conversation between soil and sky to follow you into sleep. May it remind you that what we build, and how we care for it, can be as tender, as forgiving, and as renewing as the very earth beneath our feet. Thank you for wandering with us through mud, faith, and engineering. Until our next quiet journey together, rest well beneath your own sheltering night.